does this fact suggest that an omniscient and omnipotent and perfectly benevolent God has designed our world? Not at all. I mean, that's probably the last thing you would infer from such a fact. But ask the other question. Ask, is this fact compatible with the existence of the biblical God? The answer to that question, of course, is yes, and it is always yes. You simply must add caveats like, who can understand the will of God? He may have wanted to destroy his creation for some reason that surpasses our understanding. And of course, you can do this with human events. You look at the Holocaust. Would a reasonable person looking at the Holocaust, at the fact that millions of people were herded into ghettos and terrorized and then murdered and reduced to ash by their neighbors, would you look at that series of events and say, well, there's probably an omniscient and perfectly benevolent and all-powerful God taking an interest in human affairs? You wouldn't. But is it compatible with the biblical God? Of course. You simply must say, God was very pissed off at the Jews, or we have something called free will, and God could not deny the Nazis such a golden opportunity to sin. Who can understand the will of God? As scientists, I think we have to observe that there is a profound difference between acquiring a picture of the world through dispassionate analysis of the facts and acquiring it through patent emotionality and wishful thinking, and then only then looking to see if it can survive contact with the facts. Given the gaps in science and given the elasticity of religious thinking, it will always be possible to reconcile the most gratuitous nonsense with our modern scientific worldview. This is not the same thing as having scientific reasons to believe in God. So in conclusion, I just want to give you a sense of what is motivating these remarks and my participation here at the meeting. Because I'm afraid that we can lose everything we have. I don't just mean personally. I'm talking collectively. I think we can lose a civilization that functions most of the time by the rules of basic human sanity. I mean, you might think we haven't quite achieved that, but maybe we haven't, not quite. But look at how so much of the world lives at this moment. Look at the mayhem born in the name, largely in the name of what people believe about God. I mean, look at what life is like in Iraq and Afghanistan. So much of this world is consumed by violence, and so much of this violence is born of the religious fragmentation of the human community. I mean, the thing that I'm most worried about now is this religious fragmentation and the religious impediments to clear thinking. The religious willingness on the part of millions to rationalize the violent sacrifice of their own children by recourse to fairy tales. And religion allows this. So it just seems to me obvious that the history of our civilization is not yet written, and there is no guarantee that the religious maniacs of the future will not be the ones to write it. Now, in a later session, I plan to talk about ethics and how I view spiritual experience, because I think that these are real domains of inquiry. It's not all just mumbo-jumbo. To say they're real domains of inquiry is to say that they can be explored very much in the spirit of science and without dogmatism. But briefly, I'll just say that the best in us does not require the worst in us. I mean, our love of other human beings does not need to be nurtured by delusion. And yet we are hearing continuously from every corner of our culture that delusion is all we have. Delusion deserves our respect. Delusion is holy. It's not true. Thank you very much.
I have a suspicion that Lawrence Krauss might have something to say about that.
Well, obviously I agree with much of what you said. It's hard not to, but I think I'm at least as much concerned. In this political season, have been spending a lot of my time trying to actually affect elections in my own state of Ohio, and by recruiting candidates who believe in science as a useful activity. But to take the wonderful example from Bertrand Russell, surely it would be a waste of. The teapot around the sun is an interesting example because it's not worth even talking about, right? I mean, it would surely be an incredible waste of scientists' time to spend a lot of their time trying to explain why there wasn't a teapot around the sun. Instead, it would be a remarkably more productive thing to explain exactly how you can predict the motion of the planets around the sun using this law of gravity, and that maybe you can understand the future of the universe and the past and the incredible things you can learn about it. And so the way I'd frame this is that perhaps the best, if you believe that a rational world is a better world, and I do, and I know you do, that to me one of the best ways to do that is to demonstrate rationality rather than attacking irrationality. It's important at times to do it, and I've done it. But I think it's much more fruitful in the end to lead by example. That's the argument I think I want to stress.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's that teapot around the sun again.
Well, I'm not going to defend religion from Sam Harris, but I did want to say a word about American religion. I'm a little bit more sanguine about it than you are. I live in Texas. I have many friends who belong to denominations that officially teach all sorts of things that I find absurd or abhorrent. But when you really talk to them, which is not so often, about what they really think, you find their opinions are much more woolly. And that it may be that 53% or whatever the percent is, when asked in a poll, will say they believe this, that, or the other thing. But when you really get to talk to them, you find their beliefs are not so certain. In particular, many of them believe that many of them belong to religions that officially teach that those who do not accept Christ are doomed to an eternity of torment in hell. And yet I find that they don't try to convert me. I mean, they don't make any attempt to convince me that I'm going to be burned in hell for eternity if I don't join their church. And, of course, one possible theory is that they don't mind if I spend eternity in hell.
Want you to.
But, I'm inclined to think, and I find this in talking to them, on the occasions when I can talk to them more seriously, that they're not that certain about it. But I wouldn't say that I'm sanguine about the world of Islam. And the obvious difference is performance. Larry and I and Sam can talk about these things, and we'll even, if anyone ever watches this program, be out there, and Christian Americans will hear us saying these things, and I don't really feel that anyone's going to come after us to cut off our heads. But in the Islamic world, and even in Europe, where there are now a very large number of Muslims, you can't be that secure. Theo van Gogh was murdered for saying unpleasant things about Islam. And, we've seen so many examples of this. So I think, I don't have much respect for religion, but I think it's important to not to necessarily disrespect them all equally. In fact, I think this business of respect for religion, and here I'm really just seconding Sam Harris, really is dangerous. I think that not only with regard to truth, matters of fact that Sam Harris talked about, but with matters of morality, that the fact that people take their morality from their religion should not necessarily entitle it to respect on our part, if on the basis of our best feelings it is in fact immoral.
Sam, did you have a...
Sure.
Because I have one thing I want to say.
Yeah, there are many things. First, let me pick up on what Stephen just said.